Hello, and welcome to our video series on individuals newly vulnerable to poverty. My name is Brianne. I'm a student at Ambrose University, and I've been working with Dr. Cresswell on this project. This is the second of 3 videos on Chapter 4 of the report, and will cover further features and circumstances of people in poverty. We gathered this information using a survey distributed Canada-wide during the summer of 2021. This format allowed us to hear about people's experiences directly. A total of 1,504 people responded. We observed that 38% of people reported having money troubles, 11% noting that they were very much affected. This is the 7 on the graph. This is a similar number of Canadians found to be living below Canada's official poverty line by Statistics Canada during 2021. This next graph shows how many people related those money troubles to the COVID-19 pandemic. 168 participants, or 8.5% of the total sample, reported that their financial situation was very much due to COVID-19. This is the group we are referring to when we discuss the newly vulnerable. Our report uses an indicator called subjective social status. SSS measures socioeconomic status using the rungs of a ladder to represent people from the bottom to the top of Canadian society. In our survey, 13.9% of respondents reported themselves on the bottom 3 rungs of the ladder, and the SSS value was lower for people who reported the highest levels of money troubles. When SSS is combined with a sense of anger or injustice about one's position on the ladder, it yields a measure called relative deprivation. Our results show that the newly vulnerable experienced higher levels of relative deprivation than the non-newly vulnerable. However, the difference was not as large as expected. When comparing the participants' self-reported levels of financial distress before the pandemic, and then again over a year after the first pandemic health measures were introduced, the situation had clearly worsened for participants, as the number of participants who reported that they were thriving or stable had decreased, while the number of participants who reported that they were recovering, had bills mounting, or were in crisis had increased. As for the employment status of newly vulnerable participants, prior to the pandemic, the majority were employed full or part-time, but many were unemployed. Of those who were employed either full or part-time, some were self-employed, and 1 participant was retired. At the time of the survey, the majority reported that their work continues as from March 2020. All other categories were relatively similar in size, and lastly, 10 participants reported that they had lost their job temporarily and were waiting to return. When asked to anticipate their employment status in 2 months, the majority expected to be in full-time employment, but many expected to still be unemployed. 1 participant expected to be retired. Of those who expected to be employed either full or part-time, some expected to be self-employed. Individuals who said their finances were in crisis demonstrated slightly higher levels of relative deprivation compared to those not in crisis. They also reported lower levels of the following issues: overall quality of life, access to community support, and access to emotional or financial assistance. Overall, newly vulnerable participants showed lower resilience than non-newly vulnerable participants. This was identified using a survey instrument, which has a lowest score of 0 and a highest score of 100. The quality of life scores for the newly vulnerable were lower than those for the non-newly vulnerable across all 4 categories: psychological, social, environmental, and physical. The impact of negative circumstances is also reflected in reported lower levels of interactions with others that gave a sense of connection and a positive or bigger picture. Although participants in financial crises were less likely to donate money, they reported higher levels of solidarity behavior, such as donating material and food items and offering assistance to those economically affected by the pandemic. They also engaged in more behavior that could be described as everyday political activities than other participants in the survey, such as signing petitions, engaging in public policies, and expressing concern via social media for those economically affected by the pandemic. If you'd like to be a part of the interviews about this information, feel free to reach out to the project coordinator at jim.cresswell@ambrose.edu.